Good evening, everyone. As Edwin just explained, I will be talking to the four personalities who are here on stage with me. But before that, I'd like to thank you once again for joining us for this next phase of the Elektronika project. As Edwin explained, we're trying to map out a history of the electronic music scene in Malta as it was born or evolved from other things and grew until the present day. It's grown prolifically. And this session particularly is the first of three, as he said, oral history sessions, where we will be getting first-hand accounts of what our guests today experienced in building the scene, so to speak, or becoming part of the scene over the years. And tonight's session features Brian James, Owen J, David D, and Coco. And the reason we started with this lineup is because these four persons here are among the first, actually, if not the first, possibly the first, on the scene, as they will be explaining soon. And I'd like to start with David D, actually. David, you are possibly the godfather, I would say, of the dance music scene in Malta as we know it, the modern day dance music, if we don't step into the late 80s, as the 80s started to fade into the 90s. So I'll leave it to you to start with a bit of an intro about yourself, quick intro, and how you got involved in DJing, because I remember you were DJing way before the scene.
Well, basically, starting DJing in the 80s, mid-80s, basically, when you get inspired by going to discos. We used to call them discos, not clubs at that time. So we used to go in some discotheques that inspired you with the 80s music, and that you want to be DJing in those. At the same time, you're watching other DJs. To let you know is at that time, mixing with the vinyl records wasn't really that type of being very accurate in doing the mixing, but it's inspiring of buying music and at that time, and I started doing these mobile discos, and going with mobile discos gets you always what you want to do next and next and next and next. So with mobile discos gets you maybe to introduce yourself playing in another disco, in a proper discotheque, because from mobile to disco you have a little bit of a step by step. But basically I started myself in the mid 80s, going at that time we only had actually a few discotheques which were in Slima, in St. Julian's, and we had these ones in that they used to do mobiles in Valletta, and that's all about it. It was, DJing wasn't really that kind of, you're gonna be doing a mixing or stuff. You're being there, doing the talking, playing the music. You're having a lot of people, but it was really fun at the time. And I think it can get you inspired to do DJing, because you're seeing yourself on a stage, you're thinking, wow, I want to be a star. You know what I mean? So that was it, Right,
and of course, the 80s were at least introducing the concept of the 12-inch remix, which was important, because I think that was a stepping stone towards the dance music that we know in the early 90s, and that morphed and evolved into the
because basically
thing.
the 70s music, 70s, early 80s, they were doing, most of them were 7 inches, the disco music, right? At the time, the era was many of the tracks were 70s disco. And then they started to introduce the 12 inches, which basically, if you're starting DJing, to afford buying a 12-inch record was very hard for us. But then when you buy that 12-inch record, you started thinking, wow, this is better, So I remember myself, the first record I remember I bought was Gino Socio, was called Dancer, the 12-inch. And I bought it because when I went to the record store, I heard the song and I said, I want this song called Dance. And I'm like, you know, used to go and sing it to the guy. And he said, oh, the only thing is we don't have 7-inch. We have 12-inch. And I'm thinking, oh, this is a lot of money. But then, you know, then you start thinking about, well, I've got the first 12-inch record, you know. So it was something that when you start building up 12-inch records, then you're thinking, now you're going to have a collection of tracks. Still, the 7 inches were still like being played in discotheques, you know. You remember the times when there used to be this discotheques called Raffles, the Tigulio. These are places where, yeah, that's it, Vibes and Euro. We used to go there, but then, you know, when you start seeing these guys, you're watching the DJ playing, and he's playing a 12-inch record, then you're thinking like, oh, I want to try to buy them stuff, you know?
So you get tempted into it. And those discos at the time, when did they start getting to become like more like clubs? More that club, because before, as we know,
yeah,
the bars in the 80s didn't actually have DJs.
No.
The bars just had playlists or VHS tapes running
exactly
the same videos that they'd get from
well,
abroad.
when you mentioned that, it's good to mention that, because when you mentioned the time when you have bars in, was it called Parcheville at the time? I don't remember.
It was.
Was Parcheville, yeah. And there used to be just there's a few bars, you know.
Very
I remember
few.
the Alley. There used to be a place called Paul's Punch Bowl.
Yeah.
And some other places, you know, and I was introduced to go to play in the Alley, to be honest. And that's when the guy was playing with tapes, no records and stuff. And they said, they have a DJ. And I'm thinking, really? They have a DJ in this place? And the guy who was playing there was playing TTK tapes, you know, whatever, I don't know. They had tapes and cassettes and stuff. And I said, that's a DJ? And I'm thinking at that time, when you DJ, you're supposed to play records, but in the bar,
anything goes.
anything goes. So it
That reflects the fact that at the time,
yeah,
record stores in Malta were quite limited.
yeah, we had Clark Limited. So I remember Coco. I met Coco in a record store, and I used to go and buy records from her. She used to give me everything, just to sell me records. No, but but then at the same time, when you think about it, we didn't have that much places to play. As regard if you started to DJ,
Yeah.
we didn't know. When you say somebody say, I'm in a bar, and then somebody say to you, listen, they need a DJ there, and I'm going, well, the first DJing for me was not DJing as a mobile DJ, but DJing in a place where you don't have to carry anything and equipment and stuff. So when the guy said to me like, yeah, this is the place, and I'm seeing cassette decks, and I'm thinking, well, where am I going to be playing? And the guy, said, what you have to do is play this tape. If you start bringing your own records, playing your own music, then you have to record the records you think are going to be good for the people. And that's when you start getting more motivated and thinking, you know what, I'm going to try to make my own selection of mixtapes. There was nothing about mixing. Forget it. Finish one record, playing the other record. Because it's all about, playing the music,
Yeah.
That's what it is.
But when do you see that there was a transition then from the disco, what we see as the disco of the 80s,
Yeah.
to the club of the 90s? Where do you see that that change happening? Was it 92, 93?
Yeah.
Was that the period? I think?
That was exactly what you're just trying to say. What you're saying is because when for example, I started to do DJing in this place called the Alley, and they were playing this tapes. Then I was invited to play in another place, and the guy said to me, do you want to DJ for me? And you know, that's what started to make. And he said to me, I said, yeah. And I said, okay, let's do business here. You know, that's how it goes. And he said to me, but what do you want for DJing? That's when my mind clicked and said, you know what? I got tired about recording records I used to buy, record them in a cassette, and do all that rewind, play forward and stuff. You know, it was really hard for me. So I was like, you know what? This is the best time for me to say to him. I said, you know what you need? You need 2 turntables and a mixer. Think about it, a mixer. We didn't even know what a mixer was. We knew, but then
very basic models of mixers were available as well.
And then that's why, then it was the best times for me to say, you know, this is the best time for you to start building something of having a DJ also in a bar. You know, that's when it all started.
Mm-hmm. That kick-started a whole new concept, a whole new scene as well. You didn't have to go to a club.
No.
You just had to hang out in a bar, and there was a DJ to keep you there, basically.
Yeah, yeah. It wasn't really that fashion at that time to have a DJ in, because DJing in a bar, what do you have to do? They used to play background music. Well, when we say background music, it wasn't like a soft music. We were playing music, 80s music, tracks after a track. And, but then it was when they see a DJ, I say, oh, they got a DJ. But then it wasn't a conflict, because at that time, a DJ was playing from one time to another time. So you play from 9 o'clock till 11 or something, or 12, mostly 12, and then everybody goes to the discos, clubs. At that time, you remember.
It used to be the first you hang out at the bar, and then go to the actual nightclub.
It was coming, it was becoming
that was the start of it, I think.
That was the start, yeah.
Eventually, obviously, it had created the scene, and as we know, there were also the clubs started to bring foreign DJs instead of locals as well.
Yeah, that's exactly when it wasn't kind of irritating me, but when we used to go to a disco back in the days, there used to be, if I can mention the names, there was to be Styx, Stones, Tigulio, Raffles, and all these discos and stuff. We used to go there, and we had a problem as a Maltese people. When you go to DJing at that time, they used to use a lot of microphone. So for us, because of the language, well, it was easier for an English DJ to go on the decks. There was no mixing involved. Playing the records, saying something, blah, 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 blah. And
well, that covered for the mixing,
You bridge by talking.
Exactly.
Bridge by talking, exactly. It wasn't really that mixing.
Styx was like that, exactly.
That was like it, you know. So if you had a bit of an accent, which was, I remember, David Chappelle. You know, David Chappell or David... You remember him? And he was trying to do that accent, right, you know. And I used to think, like, that sounds weird, man, but, you know. Then they get these foreign DJs, and we used to look at them like, oh, okay, this DJ speaks English and stuff. And these guys were like huge for us. We're like, wow. We used to go there and watch them every time he plays a track. And it's just like this. You remember Ian James?
Yes, of course.
You know, every time we hear his voice, my name is Ian James, and I'm like, whoa, I want to try. And we used to try to practice. You know what I mean? That's what our DJing formats.
And I think after that, the next step was to start organizing parties. I think that parties started to creep in slowly, and people start to organize. I think that the first indications of perhaps what we call promoters now, but in the beginning it was very basic, I suppose. And I know there are certain parties you were involved in as well, and I think we're going to be as well involving Coco at this stage.
Because basically the party scene, when we mention, so everybody would know about this, party for us, when you mention the name party, think about it, back in the days, party, you say party, what's a party?
Party, it was like something happening at home.
Yeah, like
between families.
Holy communion and stuff.
Did they gave you food?
Yeah, exactly. Would I go with a gift, with a present with me to go to the place? You know, we didn't even know what the meaning of a party. You know, but back in the days when we started that scene of organizing a party. I think Diane could explain more when she started to organizing something with your friends.
That's right. As David D was saying before, we actually started off in the dance bar era when the dance bar started, and that's when we were playing high energy music as well. That was one of my first genres actually. Before the house music, it was high energy music, and I did involve the beat mixing when doing the high energy music. And from there, that was the dance bar eras, and we shifted on to these so-called parties. And as David was
I
saying...
think that it's important to mention the contribution of the gay scene, actually,
That's
to
right,
the
yes.
nature of parties going from,
That's right.
let's say, what David thought was a Holy Communion party to an actual wild
that's
party.
it.
Like,
Yeah.
The very first parties actually happened on the island here in Malta were gay parties.
Exactly.
And that's where I...
Respect.
to
I have to say
Thank
that.
you. Well, actually, wasn't that easy, because even to hire out the equipment at that time, there was no equality, for the gay people. I did have a hard time to actually rent out the equipment, but thankfully I found these two guys, Silvio and Desmond, the late Desmond, which helped me, who they offered to help me out. Yes, we said they had the equipment, and they said, yes, of course, we'll rent out the equipment to you. And we organized the first parties. I wasn't the organizer, I was the DJ. The organizers at that time were Joe Fountain.
Exactly, yeah, Joe Fountain, yeah.
Yes, and I was selected to be their DJ for the gay parties at Natasha's. That's right. Natasha's in Shamshia.
That's it.
Which presently changed the name to Fortress.
Yeah, yeah.
And the place was fantastic. It was, like this ruined fortress.
Yeah, yeah.
And that's where we decided to keep it in very, very dark, very underground type. Because in the beginning of the 80s, that was in the beginning of the 80s. No, 90s, sorry.
90s.
Sorry,
late
90s.
80s, early 90s.
That's
Early
right.
90s, yeah.
Beginning, yeah.
So that was
Early
kind of the first
90s.
step into something a bit more, let's say, towards clubbing instead of discos.
That's
Yeah, because,
right.
basically the thing is,
Lots of candles.
lots of
That's
candles,
it.
but
Yeah.
because
We had
because
the
of-
candles going,
atmosphere.
I mean the health and
because
safety.
of Diane's.
Yeah, I'm not sure about health and safety back
Health
then.
and
but,
safety did not.
Yeah. But the thing is, because of that kind of what they created in the gay scene, that's where we got inspired about, like, oh, that's something we should do. But
That's
it
it.
wasn't the gay scene, but we tried to be like, not stealing their ideas.
You wanted to sell it to the whole
to the
public.
whole thing,
Yes.
not the only the thing. So that's when we started the sin parties.
That's it. And then the moving parties.
Yeah, exactly.
The parties that we thought were a holy communion at home.
That's what the word
Eventually.
parties is. It started from this, and then started to be more for
Became the
in
movement.
general. But it wasn't that huge. But
I mean, they were notorious in their own way. So
notorious in their own way.
Obviously,
Exactly.
and,
yeah.
and as always happens, when it's notorious, it's going to attract a bigger crowd. So the party from this size
Right.
will grow a bit bigger.
And basically, we used to lock the doors because basically these places, what we used to, when you organize something like this, we're not going to be saying that they were illegal, but limited.
Yeah.
So that at the time, Natasha's had a limited amount of maybe 45 people, 50 people. It wasn't a
It
big
grew,
place.
it grew, it
And
grew.
then after that, it started to grow. That's when it started to get worrying, because this is what happens to for people. People get curious and say, "Oh, we're here and there are good parties." That's when the name party started to blend in. You know what I'm saying? So
And then
So
it-
at those parties at Natasha's, I was playing house music, and the sourcing of music was difficult again because there was nowhere to buy from on the island. We had to travel, either go up to London or myself. I came actually from Australia via New York City. I did quite a lot of traveling back then. And that helped me to keep up to date with the latest releases of the 12 inches. So yeah, I was very ahead of the time when I arrived on the island. It was like house music, not at Natasha's, but before Natasha's, I had played somewhere another venue, and they had, you know, the manager of the venue was like, "What are you playing here?" The people, no.
But even discotheques.
So I had to change to the
They were
pop
introducing the music. Discotheques were trying to, and then remember sticks and axes. They were introducing this kind of music because they used to have these 80s and stuff, and in the 90s they had to change the style. So they had to have sets in that period of time. They play this kind of sounds. That period of time they play this kind of sound. Then the DJs changing these are there. Everybody knows what he's going to be DJing at playing music, and that's made everybody get more exciting to get into the music and the DJing. You know, you go to the club, to the disco back then, and you go, DJ Alex is playing. Oh, we would know what the guy is gonna be playing. He had a list of records, and that's the sound. You know, you remember that was it. So.
Right. I know we also need to include Al Cafe at this stage before moving on to include also Owen and Brian, because Al Cafe was a good turning point for Parcheville as well, I think.
First 24 hours.
Yes, the first 24 hours bar. Was it a cafe bar?
Yeah, it started out as a bar and had some food, then it was a hangout, then it became a bit more than that.
Yes.
It kind of morphed into a lot of things.
Because, exactly.
But everybody ended up there.
Al Cafe was a small place before, and then the owner decided to make the place larger and bigger, and he did make a big place for. And in the same period of time, there were the sin parties. So it was a clever move for him to have a DJ playing in his cafe. Mm-hmm. And at the same time, the people will listen, because as I said, people as regarding house music and stuff, in Malta wasn't really something that, what is house music? What is house music? It was something that's new, not only for Malta, but in general, house music, the late 80s and stuff. Yeah. But in the 90s, house music started to become like, so the guy who opened the bigger place for Al Cafe, they had a DJ, which is a very good friend of mine, Brian Ace. And that's when he had his decks. That's when he started to get involved in making a cafe also with a DJ. So imagine you're thinking you're having a coffee, and then suddenly you're hearing music, and you go,
and they had the Lido as well. Remember the Lido, San George Lido?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I used to DJ there.
That's what we have to mention this. But when the club scene is really happening, there seems to be a crowd which we refer to as the posers.
Yes. Yeah? Don't mention my name. Okay. Yeah.
And
that's it. But Al Cafe, remember?
Al Cafe, the San George Lido, they had the.
And I remember
there was
guys.
the crowd.
Yeah, you had the true crowd, and then you had the people who wanted to be in the crowd. Yeah. And that was the difference.
We're talking about almost 30 years ago now.
Yeah. So.
Really? Okay.
And I think also at Al Cafe, it was the first time when they started doing a bongo player with a DJ.
Right.
Because there used to be Joe Carr, I remember.
Yeah. Joe Carr,
he was playing bongos.
The legendary Joe Carr, yeah. Yeah, this is it, because you had a DJ in a bar, then people started to get to, instead of going straight direct to the club, to the disco, don't forget there were sticks and axes. You start to mellow down a little bit because it was going down, and people started to get, Parcheville was becoming more the trend to go, and Al Cafe, since it was new, that's when I'm seeing these guys, they were young. I remember the guy was always tall, man. I remember him always tall, man. But that was the time when you when he used to come and being around the people, and that's when they started to get involved in the music, yeah? As I'm saying.
Right. I'll bring in Owen and Brian at this stage as well, because Brian, I think, and both of you can actually talk as well about Brian Schembri, who was also on the airwaves. I think you were on the airwaves as well on a different station to Brian. And I think although Brian Schembri's show wasn't directly focused on dance music, I think it was called hip hop or something like that.
Exactly.
So obviously he was trying to cover other bases that were new sounds coming into Malta as well. So
yeah, basically myself, the first electronic music I heard in my life was at that time on the Rediffusion, believe it or not, and it was Kraftwerk and it was Jami Sherjar, because they were signature tunes for programs.
Yeah.
So that was my first electronic music impact.
The sports, in fact.
And yeah, that's the one.
Tour de France.
Yeah, Tour de France. Yeah, then late 80s, early 90s, I started my show, my radio show. And at that time, I was hearing Brian Schembri with the program 10 Hip Hop. And he was playing hip hop as well, but then he started inputting also rave music at the time, we used to call it, you know. And I had an interest to listening to him because I was competing with him as well on another
you had already
station.
started on a different station.
I would also like to know what kind of music he was hearing, you know, and I record them as well, and I play them on the radio station, you know.
What was interesting is that the stations at the time recognized that there was an audience for that. Otherwise, they would not have given you the space to do a show like that. I mean, today we have Kenneth here who does a very regular show, very up-to-date show on electronic music. So that's the result of what you guys started back then, and obviously the audience kept on growing. And I think that it's a good sign that the radio stations recognized that, because it means that that's a reflection of what people are getting into out there. Let's say, if not the mainstream, at least a good chunk of the public. Otherwise, they would not have bothered to bring you on air, would it?
No, that's true. And also another way of exposing ourselves to that kind of music was through MTV. They used to do a program called Party Zone, and they had also big DJs, you know, live performances. So you were exposed, because at that time, as we were saying, we were very limited also as record stores, you know. And then I think it was early 90s or mid 90s, I'm not sure exactly. I played at my first big event, which was at Fort Trinella, and it was organized by late Desmond and Masu. It was called Battle of Glory or something like that. I don't remember exactly. Yeah, and then I saw Owen also at Al Cafe, right?
I think it was earlier.
Earlier
that year. For me, it started with the show Hip Hop from Brian Schembri. I was doing my secondary school exams, and my mom used to listen to the radio. And at one point, it changed into this electronic music, hip hop, which at the time I didn't notice what I'm listening to. But gradually, you know, week after week, you're in, you can't go out. I mean, I'm still young, you know. And one day, I just recorded the show. And then during the week, I used to listen to that same show. And I really got hooked to it, you know. And so eventually I convinced my parents to buy a different kind of cassette deck, which is double, so I can record from one to the other. And obviously it was more clear, it was much better. I started buying these TDK, Dolby Sound, whatever, and every show I was recording them. Then at some point during the week I was thinking, it had a counter, you know, the cassette tape had a counter, so I was taking down notes and thinking at 1, 2, 3, there's this song, I like it. And then there's one at 2, 3, 5, whatever, I can't remember, obviously. So then I thought, okay, so I take another cassette deck, another tape, record from one to the other, and I do my favorite ones. And in between, you would fast forward. So you'll have a track and go and then another one starts. So that was the only way to do it.
I hope you still have these tapes. No, unfortunately.
So then I would give them out to my friends at school
All right.
or other friends and tell them listen to the selection, you know. And eventually, then later I used to listen to them like a year after. And
Inspired by music clip.
yeah, I remember those. But obviously the rest of the scene and the rest of the shows were always very commercial. And even within the selection, I'm sure that they were commercial tracks. But I remember Brian Schembri playing from the hip hop or electronic scene. I got to know about Orbital from him, Joe Beltram, even bands like, like NWA, for example. It was a very risky thing to play, and I know that he had issues as well for playing.
I'm sure he did.
But from there, I started getting this interest, and I used to go to D'Amato, and I remember Coco there, and there was also Woody Aki, and I was at first buying hip-hop.
Yes, it was the early 90s when eventually the 12 inches started to fly into Malta, so that the local DJs would have access to getting the tracks they liked.
Yeah, and I have to mention at this stage, because I'm not sure if you want to add something to that.
How costly they were.
Oh, yes.
Very costly.
Yes, very.
Yes.
And some of them still are, but unfortunately. I wanted to mention at this stage as well, you mentioned that there was a scarcity of record outlets, but I know that around 1993, the shop Megatech opened, and that made a big difference.
But I think a little bit before Megatech, I lived in Mosta, and in Mosta there was a small shop, not so small, but it was a sound rental place, and they had a small selection of records.
Okay.
And I used to buy like drum and bass and early, I don't know.
Oh, okay, so this is something we just found out now, but
exactly. And
so
then
far we found
slightly
out.
after, I heard that a new shop opened in Guardamangia, and I went there, and it was properly set for electronic music.
But that same year was good, because I think that's the same year that Tattinger's opened, and Tattinger's was the first venue that actually catered as a club. And I think it's the same year that you set up your DJing school as well.
This was 1993, and for me personally, a lot happened in that year. So what I said earlier happened before, so between 90 and 92. In 1993, I know that Megatech had opened. I started going there regularly because I was at a school which is close. And that same year, I met David D at the record store. And then, I think within a few weeks, I had also met Brian James at Al Cafe. And then I still remember that actual day when I was sitting at a table with Brian and other friends, and David D shows up. Yeah. And that was the whole.
When I had hair. So.
I remember that.
About Megatech, of course, when I was doing my radio show, it was this bridge talking, between because I couldn't mix. And of course with cassettes, and CDs. And
early days.
Yeah, of course. But when Megatech opened, then I went there, and then I started practicing on vinyl. There was my school for vinyl DJing.
It had a proper DJ booth.
Exactly.
I give a quick shout out here to Louis and to Silvio, who are the people behind it.
Yes. Because basically it was the first record store in Malta that had a DJ booth. So when you go to this store,
it looked like a club.
It used to be. Had a
there
DJ
was turbo
booth.
sound.
It was.
Yes.
That's when I started to make communication, because then I explained to him. I said, "Listen, I'm thinking about opening a DJ school." That's your business, and that's business. And as he said, like, really? I said, yeah. That's the hype of the whole thing, because then he made a very nice place with a DJ booth and stuff, and that's we started to make communications about bringing records, and he was starting to bring a lot of underground music. At that time, we never really noticed about strictly rhythm records and stuff, and he was, we didn't have the possibilities or resources about going to internet. We go on a magazine. Some of you maybe know there's a magazine called DJ Magazine. you know. And in the DJ magazine, there is a section where there is the records. We don't hear the records. We just read a review, what a DJ say about the records. You know, so that's when even, you know, Megatech and stuff, they were the same thing. They just read and say, this must have been good.
So
This might just bring 2, 3 records. And when we started to make a lot of, you know, deals about like, you know, bringing, it became a big hype actually. Because when I opened the DJ school, it was a try and error. I remember my mom and dad, I said to them, listen, I'm opening DJ. They said to me, what is a DJ school? I said, you know, a DJ school. They said, okay, what you gonna do? And I said, maybe they're gonna be about 2, 3, 4. I said, why are you gonna do that? I said, you never know. It turned out the first advert, it used to be on a newspaper. You do a little bit like a little square, DJ school, opening, blah, blah, blah. I had about a turn up about 40 people. And I was gonna faint. Because I'm thinking, how are we gonna do this? It was a big panic. You would never know the turnout when you're gonna do something new.
of course.
You're thinking like maybe 5, 4, 6, 7, I don't know, 40 people. And I'm like, oh my God. Then you had to start, that's when, you know, you start trying to make a proper DJ school, like with 4 DJ, you know, students coming to your
You start
school.
to sort out a schedule where you can
schedule,
cater for
exactly.
everyone. Yeah.
And you know, I thought like, yeah, this was going to be like, but it started to be every day. You know what I'm saying? It was like
a job.
It's a job, yeah.
At this stage, we have also have to mention the way how we used to get records from outside the country. I mean, at that time, there was no internet, and myself, I was getting records from Berlin, from Hardwax. I used to receive the magazine every month, or reviews of the tracks, and then I used to call them, and I used to listen to the records via phone call. You know, imagine how the hefty phone bill.
Don't forget the phone. We're not talking about a mobile phone, right? We're talking about the phone that goes like this. Do you understand what I'm saying? What?
And he used to, you know, to skip, you know.
Playing it.
Next one. Okay, hold on.
David, they mentioned his parents told him, what is this DJ school? And that reminds me of when I used to say, when people asked me, what do you do for a living? And I used to tell them I'm a DJ. And they used to tell me, oh, you're a teacher. No, a DJ. Teacher. They kept going on about it. Because DJs, well, it was not sort of looked at as a full-time job back then. And also the fact being a female DJ, it was very, very rare at that time. You know,
In fact,
not just in Malta, I mean,
I think
worldwide.
that, to my knowledge, you were the first female DJ I've actually seen performing in Malta. I don't think I've seen any other female DJs before that. So
It was, yeah. I think, yeah, exactly.
but you obviously you did it quite.
So
casually.
you're a legend.
Yeah, but you did it. She did it quite casually. She wasn't actually aiming to be the first.
Actually,
she was.
Yes, when I played in Malta, I don't think I've never come across any female
but
DJ
you weren't doing
here.
it because you wanted to be the first. You were doing it.
No,
in
I was
Australia.
doing it because it's a big passion, you know.
And you had just
immense
come from
passion
abroad
for
as well.
recorded music, dance music, and I just, you know, had to do it.
Yeah,
That's it.
but
I
luckily
bought
you
my
found
own
people who weren't
decks.
averse to having a female DJ, because as we spoken before as well, it was a very male-dominated.
Very male-dominated, even not just in Malta, but worldwide. I mean, I started off DJing from Australia when my family and I, we had emigrated to Australia, and I started off DJing back then. And I did, so that was in 87 was my first DJ gig in Australia, and 89 was my first DJ gig in Malta.
which is quite progressive for Malta, we have to say,
anywhere
89.
in the world where
Not
I
bad.
have traveled,
Not
there
bad.
wasn't a lot of mention of any female DJs. Very, very rare.
Right.
So,
I'm going to skip over to something else. I'm going to skip over to Owen, your first gig, and I believe it was an event organized by Felice, who's sitting right there, and maybe something about that first experience for you of playing in this event.
We used to DJ a lot at home, at my home studio. But yes, then eventually being in front of an audience and a big sound system is a totally different experience. And actually, it could have been Joseph, but it could have been another Joseph, which is Joe Silver, who did the event. I'm still not sure about it. And it was at Dewdrops. I mean, it was fun for me because I can still remember some of the records which I played. Then eventually, I think it was a lot of small events and bars in Parcheville, like Going Places and the Peppermint Park. That was having DJs nearly every week there. I think then as a major big event for me, it was the one of New Year's Eve, taking you to 1995, which was organized by the late Desmond. And actually on that night, there was myself starting, that was David D, and Brian was playing as well.
I was in fact just going to ask you if the three of you were actually present on
Probably
that
there
night.
were other DJs in between, I can't
Okay,
remember.
possibly. But you were, all three of you played on that
Yes.
same night. So that was also you getting more to be collaborating together as well.
Yeah.
It got you closer.
Kind of.
Because back then a good thing about events is that you don't hear all the night just a same style of music. It was like a story, but you start with house, and then you go.
Yeah. That was quite a good idea. Like you said, there's a diversity of DJs. I mean, I can kind of relate to the benefit of that because I used to, at the time, DJ in rock clubs. And that was not the case in rock clubs. In rock clubs, you started at 7:30 and you got out at 4 o'clock in the morning. And if you DJed 4 nights a week, that was it. Those were your shifts. So quite different, really. But obviously, I now appreciate more that obviously you have 2-3 hour sessions at most from a DJ. Then change the style, shake it up a bit.
Because the DJ used to play back in the days when we used to play all night.
All night.
All night, So
I mean, that was before Sven Veit thought about it.
Yes, yes,
The
exactly.
marathon sets.
Yeah, marathon, yeah.
In Malta, it was just inspired by paying one DJ only. So that was it, unfortunately. Right. So I know there were other venues in Parcheville that popped up eventually, like you mentioned, Peppermint Park as well, eventually Places as well, which was quite a busy...
Which when Places opened and start operating, that was the boom of house music in Malta.
Right,
I mean,
Yeah. Even the trend of DJing, the DJs in bars was started to become more involved in everybody, having a DJ. It was really good, actually, to be honest. I liked the fact that the bars started to have DJs, but then there was a bit of concurrence because of the clubs, of the discos, because you had a time. You have to play we used to go there at 6 o'clock. Imagine you tell a person now, the young guy going, listen, I used to play at 6 o'clock in the evening. But I used to go there, and then at 11 o'clock, the people shifts over to the club, to the disco. So you had Sticks, Access, those places. And Dewdrops had his own people, but that was it.
And Sticks eventually had those double shifts where the young kids
shifts, you remember?
would close at 10, kick everyone out.
Even
Access
Access had that. Even
Access, yeah.
Access was not one of the places I hung out. So
But in fact,
I was not allowed in because of long hair. So
But in fact, in the early...
even myself, on my first attempt, I was rejected.
So I never really went. But
Exactly.
But I did DJ there eventually. So.
Around 1993, Access had a smaller club inside named Freestyle, and they used to organize events with foreign DJs, and which I used to attend. They used to start at midnight, and they stayed till like 6 in the
That's where I
morning.
actually ended up
And
DJing
they
later
used-
on.
For me, they
time.
were like the most
In the small club.
underground events that you could attend
Yeah, because
at
of
the time.
because of the parties, because then when the sin parties stopped, because, you know, sin parties was something new. When, you know, as I said, party, the name party was the sin party. Imagine sin party. Even the name S-I-N. Wow. You know, as I'm saying, so
It ended up on the news.
it was, imagine you end up in the news. And I'm making a joke, I remember because when we used to do it, we used to really prepare cages. I remember the guy who used to, you know, hammer, he had a long hair. I used to call him, you look like Moses, man, with his sandals. And I remember that time, I said to him, guess what? There's a priest coming. And he said to me, I will knock you with the thing. Don't joke when I'm working. And there was really a priest. Because they were thinking we were organizing something
Satanic.
satanic.
Yeah, there was that.
They want to go. That's when the priest, there was a priest came and the police. The police came. And I'm remembering going out because the guy said to me, go and bring something from the car. And I'm going, oh my God, there's a priest here. And as soon as I'm going in, I'm said to the guy, he's doing with the hammering, and I said, there's a priest.
Well, you expect a priest at a sin party. You need somebody to kind of balance it out.
So yeah, that's why, you know, after the sin parties, that's when when they were stopped, they stopped and said, this is enough. That's when they started to carry on. There's places like this freestyle, you know, because that music, yeah, Al Cafe, yeah. That's with music, eh?
Tribu, was it after the same party?
I think the first party...
This is the thing. At that time, at the bars, was much more of house music. As
House
I said,
music.
House music exploded.
Became a bit more mainstream then.
Mainstream.
But then in events like, for example, you know, even Exit and Sonic Mecca by Felice, it was more techno.
Yeah, it was more underground.
So, yeah.
Yes.
I think the first event that I ever attended was actually Desmond and Masu's first party, which was at Plants in Salina.
Yeah.
No, sorry.
Baharicha.
Yeah.
Baharicha.
Right.
Another notorious place.
That's when the techno, when the techno scene was, because I think Desmond and Marso, and I think Joseph Felice, they started to introduce the techno, because there was a kind of a war.
It was rivalry.
You know, like between a techno and house, because house was really getting big.
But this was quite, the first one that they did was very housey. In fact, I remember, probably you were playing, and I listened to Deep Inside.
Deep
I
Inside.
think it was one of the last tracks of the night.
Yeah.
And there was Steve Scratcho playing as well.
Steve. Oh man, yeah, Steve Scratcho from Axis, yeah.
Who later then joined Robert
Because like
Bruce.
Axis was okay.
Robert Bruce, yeah.
We used to attend Axis, but in the whole night we used to listen to two tracks that we really liked. The rest we were just waiting all night for some tracks.
I had that at 6
another
as well,
club,
so don't worry about
the
it.
Beach Haven, because Steve Scratcho, that's where I met him. When I first met him, Steve Scratcho, he was just this little guy from school, right? A schoolboy, kind of, still a teenager, early teens. And I was playing at Beach Haven in Shamshia. This was after the refurbishment they did in the 90s, early 90s. And the owner introduced me to Steve. He told me this guy, he's into DJing, you know. And I said, oh, Steve, come over here, you know, go get behind the decks and do your stuff. And oh my God, I mean, the way he scratched, it's like coming from a DMC competition. And eventually, you know, the Steve Scratcho, oh my God, they became international, I think. Yeah. Huge. So that was at Beach Haven. Rhythm Masters, that's it. Yeah, so Beach Haven had its good years as well.
Yeah, I have to also mention a few other places like that were important. I think Pushka was a name to mention and you cannot leave out. Generator.
Wow.
Pushka, my personal opinion, I think it was the best club ever. I mean, and interior, how it was made. I mean, it was
the Pushka
fantastic.
Club, for people maybe you didn't know about, this is, there used to be a restaurant called Palazzo Pescatore, and it has a fantastic entrance. It
That's
has like a garden.
It's a house of the nobility, actually.
A house of
originally.
nobility, yeah. And the owner who used to own the Al Cafe and other places, the Lido St. George, he fell in love with this place. So he basically invested everything to make it as a club. But when you think about it, the club is in the neighborhood.
Yeah.
So it was in a designated area. So the guy made the place he was obsessed with painting of the Bible. So when you think about it, you go in a club.
No, there was a glass on the floor, sand and clay pots,
The
and
guy- yeah.
Roman coins.
And the place,
underneath.
imagine, the place he called it Pushka, and all you see is all these Bible people. Jesus, was it called Jesus? With the Greek name and stuff. And I remember, I said, wow, this place is going to be huge, you know. But unfortunately, because it was in the neighborhood,
It was in the residential area.
in
That's the
residential
problem.
area, yes, exactly, that's the word, residential area, we had problems, eh?
I remember, considering that the country had a lack of electronic music, Pushka used to be transmitted live on the radio from noon till the evening.
It was a great promotion for the place to
And
open.
I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Pushka introduced Sunday afternoon, right?
As well, yeah.
Exactly.
The
Yes.
timing,
Because the only
I think
way
it was a first timer for
it
them,
was there, because
for
it
the
was the
island.
only, because as I said, the thing is, when you're in a residential area, think about it, St. Paul's Bay, you know, this is a very, very quiet area. Imagine the oldest people living there. Forget about now. But by that
Well,
time,
they probably still live there. It's just
Those are
it was
people-
Bujiba Square that was the party zone. You know?
think about it. St. Paul's Bay was a place where only the quiet oldest people. Then suddenly imagine 12 o'clock at night.
House is shaking.
And that was the thing that they had problems about it.
It was overground as well, so
You know.
the sound.
That's when it
And
was
another thing that I remember about Pushka, which is a bit funny as well. You know, it's the DJing. No DJ had a time there. You just go behind the DJ booth. You know, there was a sofa, and somebody is playing, and the owner used to have a torch in his hand. He start looking at the crowds, and if he doesn't like the music that DJ is playing, he get his torch. He chooses one.
That's the sign.
That's your sign. Go in. And if the first DJ, when the DJ goes and the first record, he doesn't like it, next one.
That was the most funniest part about it.
Very fast back to back.
Fast back to back, yeah. And that was on a Sunday afternoon. Because the biggest part about this place, because actually it was sad, it was really sad. This place had the opening, just the opening. It was on a Friday. On a Saturday, there was only a few people, and it was sad. So at the time, because of, you know, people were more complaining, and that's the reason why Sunday afternoon is introduced. Because Sunday afternoon, nobody's going to be complaining. And you used to
Especially in
be
the
there.
summer, they'll all be at the beach.
Yeah, and I remember it used to be only £1 Maltese to enter. £1. £1. And it used to be packed. And us DJs with the records, not USB, a record case. We used to have two, because we don't know, maybe we're going to play. And that's exactly what he said. You go there, if you make a mistake on the first record, all he does is, with the torch, you're next, and you just done. You go like with the face like a little kid. I didn't do. That was it, man.
But then you get the other turn soon.
Oh yeah, well yeah. Yeah.
No, of course. I mean, obviously, there were other. You've been on radio shows as well. Eventually,
We had, I think at the time, we had a live radio show from Al Cafe itself.
On Live FM. It
Exactly.
was called.
And actually, to go back a few years, Brian Ace used to DJ from Al Cafe, and he was a very good influence on us because he used to play very varied style, and we did not recognize what was house or trance or techno. It was whatever, it all sounded good to us. Then when you start DJing, then you start to making sense of these tempos, because you're mixing and you say, oh wow, I can't play this because it's too fast or it's too slow. But at the time, we didn't really care what the tempo was. And Brian Ace used to play a very, very good selection.
Right. After that, I know that we can talk as well about you focusing more on after Tinnitus, for example. You released the first, let's say, electronic music album in Malta, I would say.
I think I started getting interested into production was when I met Edwin and Frankie, and they were producing at David D's house. For me, it was like, wow, how do you do this music? I had no idea where to start from. And Edwin was very, very helpful, and obviously without him, I would have never done the album. The thing is, I had a vision in my mind, and I used to tell him, I want to reach this kind of sound, So I used to go and listen to them working, and it was all before it was hardware with samplers, it was quite complicated. And so I think in around 96, I had traveled to London, and I bought all the equipment, hand luggage, and and then I came here and I practicing every day, and Edwin was obviously always on the phone with me, explaining to me how things should be made. In fact, a lot of tracks done.
You all got into production later. No, I'm not sure about Diane. Did you get into production as well?
No, not so much.
You decided to focus more on DJing.
A couple of tracks my own, though, but it was the early days of production. This new culture of DJing really came about in the new century that we're in, the noughties. The naughties. Say from the year 2000 onwards, there was a new culture of DJing. The DJ became the producer, and it became, more recognized as an artist as well.
Became the superstar.
That's right, Eva. So that was a bit before my time, because eventually I started reducing the number of gigs I was doing. After about 24 years of DJing.
Of DJing, yeah. I know the feeling.
And I have a question to the techno dude there, James.
Brian, James.
From the house bench, you being a techno dude. What about the liquid? X-Vibes or...
Yeah, but that's a bit later.
Later.
I used to hear a lot that there was the techno music. If
yes,
you wanted techno music to dance to, you go to
probably
the liquid.
It will still be, I think. But I think liquid came a bit later.
Yeah, that's
than the periods we're talking about now.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, it was because before it used to be called Vibes.
Yeah, Vibes was from the 80s. Was Vibes.
Exactly. Yes.
With the animals
production,
at the back.
Production, as Owen was explaining, we, being DJs, we wanted to know what's the meaning of producing. So I remember meeting the same thing, Edwin, and there was his friend, his partner in crime, it's called Frank, was he?
Frank, yeah.
Frank. And that's where I went to the first time, went to their studio. The guy was a maniac, playing keys like a crazy. And Edwin was more the technical, Edwin always being that guy, technically and stuff. I used to watch him. You tell him, and he does it exactly. What do you think about this? And we still listen sometimes to the old records we used to play. They still sound good. And it's good influence for us, But for us to know what it is, technology with computers and stuff, being a DJ, we weren't really, that, intelligent about. We know the records, we know what music. For them, DJing was, you have to be a friend with these people. There has to be some partnership. And you tell them, listen, I need this kind of sound. I need this kind of beats. And it's helped. It helped the guys. It helped us. And that's when you start to become a team. Forget now, because as I said,
at this stage, at this time, what we're mentioning, as I told you, there was more house music. So myself, I wouldn't.
You focused more on techno.
I wouldn't play in any bars. I just played in clubs and events, basically at that time.
Yeah, because the thing is about techno music, playing in a bar or anything anyway, you know, techno, because this is really get that thing to play in a bar, and playing techno wasn't a trend in Malta, because
It wasn't the right atmosphere, I
the
think,
right
for it.
atmosphere, because the girls coming there, showing off, you know, la la, whatever. You know, we had these groupies and stuff. So techno for them was like, ooh, oh, what is he playing?
The bar owners would look at me like I have a virus or something, you know.
Exactly, yeah.
Torch.
You know, Torch, get the hell out of here, you know what I'm saying? But it was funny, but, you know.
Yeah, right.
We
But I
had-
think
we
there
had-
was a
But
time
there was
when-
a growth in the techno scene
Oh,
as well,
definitely.
despite being
That was-
underground.
I
Yes.
think
Definitely.
from my part, after playing a lot of bars, I think then they started booking us to the major events, and I wasn't even resident at any.
Because then there were
any
the
bar.
festivals. I mean, we
And
haven't
then we
gone into
started going
And
festivals.
then
Well,
even
it's not-
yourself, you know, you
And
yourself, you
even
went,
style-wise,
you went
I didn't
techno
play.
as well.
I started playing like harder stuff, and that's when I wasn't getting booked in bars anymore. And plus that the music, when it comes to house music, the early house music was quite underground. But then it started going a little bit more happier, so I wasn't really.
Basically,
I don't want to play
I
that
think
stuff.
the Tribu was one of the, I don't know, it was one of the first. I wasn't living in Malta at the time, but when Tribu, they started to introduce bringing very big names from abroad.
Also Sonic Mecca.
And Sonic
Yeah.
Mecca, yeah.
Yeah.
As
And
well.
bringing DJs from abroad, and they were more focused on the techno.
Yes.
To be
yes,
honest.
Yes. No,
So that's for us.
But then techno kicked, you know.
Kicked so much that for us house DJs, we were looking at them like, okay, we're not going to
It was
play.
our time then.
But there was always, I think, a second stage for, let's
Yeah.
say, a tent for house
Yeah,
music
yeah,
as
yeah.
well. So
It was
they
that was a
catered
good
for
time.
everything, really.
It was
I
a
mean,
good.
except,
it was a
except for Sonic Mecca, which was always techno, I think. No?
a bit of everything, yeah.
But not so much house.
Techno.
techno.
Because techno, as I said, techno started to pick up, and when it started to pick up, house DJs, it was like a kind of a rival thing. You know, you play house, I play techno. You play house. So house was basically before the techno. So as a DJ, you used to play a house, and after comes the techno. You remember the times
Yeah, that's it.
when they didn't have two arena.
Yeah, so it built up.
It builds up, you know. I don't know. Tribu, go ahead.
I think it always started with house, then
House.
went to techno, and then ended up with Colin playing psychedelic trance.
Psychedelic trance. Well, yeah, that's it.
Uh-huh.
You know,
Yeah, true.
that's exactly, yeah.
So that's great. And then eventually, we have to mention as well, because at this time we're nearing the end of the 90s, basically. And I think at the end of the 90s, I know Brian remained
But I think
on the
towards
techno line. But
towards
Techno
nine-
and also electro, yeah.
And electro,
I
yes,
was
and
playing
electro.
At Misfits. I was playing.
yes,
electro.
because we have to mention Misfits, because that
but
was
the
at the
Misfits
turn.
came around 1999, 2000.
At the end of the 90s, exactly.
But I
yes.
think between 98 and 99, the techno scene got so heavy that even myself, I was not interested anymore. It was getting really loopy, like beats. And what I was playing was, there were a lot of sounds, and the people couldn't take it. They just wanted it heavier. So I kind of sat back
So
and
you said-
we did nothing.
took a step back and
then,
went into...
And then Misfits came along.
And that
they
was,
wanted
that was the perfect place, I think, for you to get into...
And we went back
different
to the
sounds.
origins, playing like slower, deep house then.
Yeah, so not even the actual house music, but going into a particular
Yeah,
Exactly.
style
you
of
start to be
house.
selective.
Yeah.
You start to get
I mean,
selective.
at the end of the day,
In fact,
it was a
then-
bar. So
in fact, by that time, then the minimal hype came out, you know, and I was playing minimal, of course, you know. I mean, which is more tech.
I was at the same time. I think you released some stuff on Pink Pube as well. No,
Yes,
Was that as well?
yes.
So that was also another. But we'll be talking about Pink Pube, I think, in a different oral history session. But it's worth mentioning as well, because Pink Pube was a good platform for releases then eventually. But of course, as you mentioned, House of Misfits, the event itself that you put together, brought foreign talent as well. It brought local DJs. I mean, I have to mention Philippe, who was a mainstay, I think, who doesn't live in Malta, I think, anymore, does he? Does he?
He does.
But does he still DJ?
At times, sometimes
Occasionally he does.
A
because
one-off.
He always had great sets. So
Yeah, well, I was living abroad at the time, and he used to talk when we used to talk back in the days. We used to talk, was it on a Skype or on a, we used to talk. And the guy, and the guy was like, I was speaking to him, he said, I'm coming to Malta. And he said, you should come and play in this Misfits, you know? And I said, but do they really know this kind of music, you know? But they did, man. They did like this deep house and wow. And I said, like, it was new for me to be in Malta and to play this deep house music.
Yeah, I mean, it's good they had the residency there, actually had proper.
Because I remember speaking to him.
The House of Misfits were too.
Because I told him, listen, but they do really know this house? The guy said to me, yes, they do. This was like, oh, it's evolved really big, you know?
In fact, my nights at Misfits were called Unfocused, and then when all this Unfocused event started.
I think then it moved to Liquid, no?
Exactly.
It grew a bit bigger, too big for me, and Misfits closed down eventually. So.
Exactly.
But I think we're skipping over into the 2000s there, I think. So I want to actually talk to Diane as well a bit, because as she mentioned, and we mentioned as well earlier, she was the first female DJ locally. But what was it that got you into DJing? Because as you said, it wasn't very normal to have female DJs at the time. What got you interested, and what actually gave you the drive to, I'm still going to do this?
I think mainly it's not associated with females because it's very technical. After the 80s, you know, the beat mixing started, so you know, things started to get technical then. And during that time, I think most women, they weren't very directed towards anything technical, really.
They weren't
no, but for me, I had a passion for it, you know, even at school, during my school years. When we held the Christmas parties, my school friends would just nominate me as you get the music for us. And I used to take my dad's tape recorder, the reel-to-reel, the old one like that, take it to school, you know, and organize the music for them. Yeah. Before the cassettes, actually, yeah. And the recording, I mean, with the now you know a mic, not built in, not inbuilt, and recording from a radio onto the reel-to-reel. And my passion, you know, just I think maybe you can also relate to this because you feel you have to do it, you know.
I think we started because everywhere that we went, it was all commercial music. And then I got to know about the style, and we were thinking, but what are we going to do? Deep down, you know, you say. And I think we started playing because we were saying, but what music is there going to be? And it's always not what we like. And I think we started DJing out of the fact that we want to play the music that we like. Not saying, oh, I want to be a DJ, I just want to listen to my music. Probably if there were other DJs playing that style, I would have rather stayed on the dance floor.
So the fact there weren't those DJs available pushed you to step up to it and do it yourself. Yeah, all right. That's good enough reason, I suppose.
But also, to complement with that, let's face it, it's nice to have a crowd and seeing them responding to what music you are putting. The interaction, it's very nice, and it boosts you as a DJ, you know, I mean, it gives you...
In fact,
also it was a group thing as well, because we were a group of friends and everyone's into music, and so it was an automatic thing. It's hard to avoid, you know, it's like everyone's into music, so
I have to clarify that.
The next logical step.
I have to clarify that as a club DJ, not a radio DJ, you know, I was...
Of course, because the difference, you are more into the club scene.
Right. There may have been female radio DJs, but not club DJs.
No, of course, we're talking about club DJs. I mean, radio DJs or radio presenters is a totally different role, so to speak. I mean, you could be a radio presenter, but not necessarily, there's nothing to do with what we're talking about. I mean, club and parties and festivals, that's totally different. I'm actually noticing, there was a picture then, there was John Bundy looking over your shoulder at Dewdrops. At Dewdrops. You'll see it when it comes round. By the way,
I never realized
a
that,
quick
no.
aside. Thanks to Etienne Brincard for the flyers that you see in the projection there. Most of the visuals are thanks to him. Very good collection. I'll be looking into Brian James' collection later as well, which will complement that as well, and Coco's photos as well. So hopefully
also
we'll
at
build
the
up.
time, what we were saying is this is our perspective. There were other DJs, but I think we were more focused on the certain deep style or alternative style at the time. So there were other DJs and
But that was very alternative to what was going on as well.
Story.
Yes, yes.
So in the meantime, there were other things happening, but maybe for us they were a bit more mainstream or slightly different to what we wanted
And by
to do.
then, yeah, we have to appreciate that there were a lot of different electronic music genres emerging on the scene. All kinds, not just the house then. You had the trance, which has its own
Progressive house,
all these crossovers and all sorts of things coming out. But obviously you were essential in building, I think, the deep house following
Exactly.
here. And eventually even with the electro, that was quite niche, and
Exactly.
it eventually grew
Exactly.
as well.
I think when I was playing techno, I was looking for something a bit more experimental. Brian was more on the real hard, at the time, proper techno. So I was looking for more experimental sounds. And also at the time, thanks to Edwin, I had bought and was starting to understand modulars. So this was something to me. I remember Frank telling me, Edwin is buying a modular. And for me, I don't know what he's talking about. And when I met Edwin, he showed me this all knobs. And I'm thinking, but what's this, you know? So
Christmas tree.
then with that, I started to appreciate more certain sounds. And that is when I went into things like Neil Landstrom and Christian Vogel. And I started listening to that style and playing a lot of that, which was totally different to what Brian was playing. And I think there was a very big response, you know. But then when things got a bit harder, obviously, as I said before, it was too experimental for the crowd.
Yeah, so then it went back into an underground setting, so to speak. But I think it kind of happens over time. You get these kind of cycles that, I mean, maybe house really stayed in the mainstream
also
eventually,
because
but all the
after
other stuff.
After David's school, then there was a hype of everyone becoming a DJ. Then people started opening other schools, DJs teaching
Yes,
other
of course.
DJs. So
They still
there
do.
was everyone like playing, you know, so you can imagine everyone getting music from abroad or more shops opening. So
I mean, we mentioned Megatech, but I think there was also the KTA DJ something. I believe.
it was more focused on Italian.
But the music,
it
with the
was-
music genre they used to get, it was
But
different.
there was a time when Lewis was involved
Yeah.
in KTA, and Lewis was part.
There was also
Was
Idol,
quite-
which was of Joe Felice, Idol. He used to get
Yes.
records directly
Oh, yeah.
from
Exactly.
Detroit.
But this is the thing about the part about the DJ school. I'm not saying I'm very proud about everything, because no, there's a lot of DJs. But at the time when I opened the DJ school, the hype was unbelievable, you know, and people want to buy records. So with that, there were people involved also in opening clothes, clubbing clothes. I remember this guy from Megatech, he said to me, Dave, what did you do, man? I said, what happened? He said, you know how many turntables I had to order? And I remember going in his back room, and I saw a rack of techniques. He had about 25 to 30 techniques. I said, what are those boxes there? You know, he said, those are techniques, man. Because, you know, then the hype was become bigger. And the DJing and then record stores, like, everybody started to get more hype, you know. I remember Joseph opened this place in St. Julian's, was it?
Yeah.
So there
Park
was,
Towers.
at least there is fruit coming out from something. I was getting tired about it, honestly, but then, you know, after a while, you know, there's loads of DJs. Everybody wants to play. Nowadays, I'm seeing them like DJ Ruby, and everybody's seeing them like they're big superstars for, you know. And I'm thinking, I remember, you know.
Everybody starts somewhere. You know,
Somewhere,
so,
yeah.
I want to mention also the fact that at the time you mentioned something about Silvio, I think.
Yeah.
And he had the shop that sold clothes that go with the music style as well. And I think people were getting more into it as well, even the clothes they wore. Today,
Yeah.
maybe
The
not so
club
much.
I think
It's not so much reflected in clothes now.
It was Desmond who started
Was it Desmond?
selling clothes
Yeah.
within the Megatech store.
Because
Oh, with the Megatech as well, all right.
because the strange part about it, you know, Desmond, I remember Desmond, because I don't know if you guys remember it, the place was long, like a garage, whatever you want to call it. It was long, and he had the DJ stand on the back, on the very, very back. He had his racks for buying records. In the front, it was empty. Like you had a long way to go. And Desmond used to be there. They used to hang out together. I think they were already organizing parties, but the little ones with Marcel and stuff. But I remember we used to talk, and I used to joke about it because I used to say to Desmond, I used to tell you, listen, why don't you give him a chance, man, play. And then he started to have the front area, when you entrance, he had a little bit of a little section, and he's bringing clubwear. When you think clubwear, we didn't even know what the meaning of a clubwear. We didn't even know.
Lot of highlighters.
Highlighters.
Yeah, but people actually bought into that. I mean, as the years passed, people were buying less into the fashion side of it and more into
But
just going to the events.
the tickets to go to the event. So when you go and buy a ticket, you have, someone will tell you, why don't you buy some clothes for the event?
And we used to have
It
this
was-
dress code. I remember the dress code. So I remember this dress code thing. Dress code, dress clubwear. And then when you say dress clubwear, what is that clubwear? We didn't even know what it's meaning. Then we used to have dress colors and stuff, you know?
But Desmond was a big influence on the way people dressed that party.
Yes, fashion, eh? It was about fashion, eh?
Right, we're going to have to be rounding off this session because I think we've overrun our time. I'd like to thank Brian, Owen, David and Diane for being with us for this session today. Thank you all once again for being here with us, and we remind you that we'll be having another oral history session next month. And I'd like to thank Edwin and Electronic Music Malta for this event. Thanks to Arts Council as well, Arts Council Malta, for their support.
Should
And-
mention the M3P Foundation.
And the M3P Foundation, naturally, which I represent
Tony
as well
too.
in this endeavor.
And Dr. Tony Santos.
It's a collaboration between us and the MM to work on this project. One last thing I always like to mention is that actually everyone can be involved in the project. It is an open source portal that we have on m3p.com.mt. If you feel you can contribute information about the local scene, past or present, anything is important, no matter what it is. It could be the smallest piece of information, but it will still be important. Because if it's not known and not documented, it will be lost. So the whole point of this project is to avoid losing the history of our electronic music scene. Maybe later we'll branch out into other genres as well, but for now let's work on this. And any help you can give us, please don't feel shy. Right.
And the final thing, asking a bit the guys what they're going to play.
Oh, yeah. Best, because we'll be ending with
Well, yeah, this Ray Moody project, yeah. We basically, as you can see, the oldest DJs now. We collaborating something together. We were thinking like, what we're gonna do, because the scene is going this way and this way. So we met, and they said, let's start a new project, and we called it Ray Moody or Tres Moody, whatever you want to say. But the music style we wanted to basically introduce were a mix of between funk, house, anything that sounds good. So there is no like a genre. Whatever sounds good for us, not too commercial or nothing. We didn't like wanted to be going to the commercial scene. What is this playing around? So we can go from funk, from the really old school black sounds to anything else, basically.
Today will be a bit more house.
Today will be a bit more house because, you know,
for the occasion.
for the occasion, we don't want to upset Brian James, but we love him anyway. So thank you very much. Thank you.